What's the hardest moral decision you've ever faced? I lied to my parents about my grandmother's death. My parents hadn't been on a vacation in 30 years. My grandmother was 95. So when she passed when they had 5 days left on their cruise, my family decided that we wouldn't ruin it for them. We would just plan the whole funeral, and if my mom wanted to make changes when she got back, we'd organize that for her. There was nothing they could do to get home anyways. Every day, when it checked in, I worked with my dad. I would just go on like everything was fine, hardest thing I've ever done.
That sounds really tough. Keeping a secret like that must have weighed heavily on you. You had to balance your loyalty to your family with the reality of loss. It's hard to act like everything is normal while dealing with something so emotional. I can see why you chose to protect your parents' vacation, but I can't help but think about how hard it must have been for you to carry that burden alone.
I once had a temp assistant who was amazing, but she couldn't pass the stupid typing test that HR was administering for her to be able to be hired full-time. She had 3 chances, and she failed the first 2. I made some excuse to the HR person that I needed to go into the interview room to give her a pep talk, and I closed the door and told her to let me sit in front of the computer, and I did the test myself. Not too perfect, just enough so that she could pass. It was a moral choice, and I still struggle with whether it was the right thing to do. When she was eventually hired, I continued to mentor her. She was from a less than ideal upbringing and a single mom, and eventually she was promoted several times. I left the company, and years later, she called me and said that because I had helped her when she was desperate, and it seemed she would never be hired full-time, and because I cared enough to be her mentor, she eventually graduated from college with honors and was now an executive mentoring her own assistant.
It's interesting how that kind of situation plays out. You helped her get through a hurdle that seemed impossible, and your choice had a lasting impact. It's a tough call to make, but seeing her succeed and mentor others must feel rewarding. Life's about those little moments of support that can change someone's path. It's good to know your actions had a positive ripple effect. You never really know how much you can influence someone.
My decision to leave my bipolar girlfriend. She was in one of the worst cycles in her life, would avoid me every chance she could, and started saying some awful things to me, implying that I wanted her to hurt herself, etc. I loved her more than anything in the world, but I knew being with her was breaking my heart as well as putting stress that she didn't need on her life. I know that the woman I loved was in there somewhere, but I felt that I owed it to myself to stop being the martyr and find a happier, more stable relationship. Last I heard, she's still not doing great. I don't blame myself, but it still keeps me up at night knowing that she is suffering alone.
It's tough when you care about someone but have to put your own well-being first. Leaving a relationship like that isn't easy, especially when you still love the person. Sometimes, you realize being around them isn't healthy for either of you. It's a hard choice to make, and the guilt can linger. You hope they find their way, but you also have to look out for yourself. It's a heavy feeling for sure.
I'm the product of prostitution. I'm adopted, and I found my birth mom about 8 years ago. After doing a bit of search, I figured out who my father supposedly was. He has passed, and located his sons who live in my town. I chose not to contact them. It wouldn't be fair to find out that your dad had been banging a meth-addled prostitute when you thought he was happily married to your mom. It was hard to give up my desire to know more, but I think I made the right decision.
That's a heavy situation. It sounds like you really took some time to think about the impact your actions could have on others. Wanting to know your roots is natural, but it's also good to respect the lives of those who may not be ready for the truth. It's not an easy path, but sometimes leaving things as they are is the right choice. Trust your instincts.
Grew up in a poor town. Hardest moral choice I've made was to leave my best friends behind. On my own, I was smart enough to avoid pitfalls they fell into: drugs, loose women, fathering children too young, getting married too young, etc. Together with them, I made less than beneficial choices for myself. They were great friends growing up, but I left them behind to better myself in my life. Absolute hardest thing I've ever had to do. Felt like I repaid their loyalty and friendship with betrayal. Would I do it over again? In a heartbeat. Too many things I need to do and see to let them drag me down.
That's a tough choice to make. Leaving friends behind when you know they're not on the same path can feel really heavy. It's like you carry that guilt, but at the same time, you have to look out for yourself. Sometimes growth means making hard decisions. It sounds like it was the right choice for your future, even if it didn't feel great at the time. Prioritizing your journey is important.
Forgiving my little brother. He did a lot of shit when he was addicted. He hurt a lot of people. He stole, more or less, from my grandparents. He wrote bad checks on my account, like $1,500 worth. He kept getting into trouble, wrecking cars, breaking promises. It took him a few tries to get clean, a few relapses. And it's always going to be a struggle. But right now, he's thriving. He's working. He's staying out of trouble. And I can tell when talking to him that he's clean. My love for him overtook my anger at what he did before.
That's a tough situation. It's good to hear he's doing better now. It must have been hard to see him struggle and hurt others. Forgiveness can take time, but it seems like you've come to a place of understanding. Supporting him while he works on himself is important. It shows growth for both of you. Healing is a process, but it sounds like he's on the right path.
We made the decision to cancel our wedding and get married in our new home country after my insane mother tried to take over. This meant that my very ill father would not be at our wedding and that the rest of the family would not be able to afford to travel to the wedding. I was very close to my father and the rest of the family, and with the pressure society places on daughters to love their mothers no matter what, it was a very difficult decision. But our wedding day was perfect. That was 4 years ago. Last November, I decided to stop talking to her completely. This also meant that I would no longer have contact with my now much worse father. I miss him very much, but dementia has claimed his mind, and he sleeps most of the time. When I called to see him, FT, she would usually be in the background waiting to have a fight or yelling at his carers. It was horrible. For me, choosing to remove her from my life and thereby removing him was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make.
That's a tough situation. It sounds like you had to choose between your own peace and complicated family dynamics. It's never easy to step away, especially from someone sick. It's understandable to want to avoid the negativity and protect your own happiness. Your wedding day turned out well, but losing contact with your dad must weigh heavy. Sometimes, putting yourself first is necessary, even if it comes with pain.
For me, it was leaving my home with my kid brother still there. I raised him for the first 5 years of his life. All of his day-to-day care was managed by me. His mother is horrible. I can't stand her. She's my mother too. She was horrible to me, but treated him like a king. If she was ever around, of course. So when I became 18, I decided to leave. It was so hard. Leaving a kid behind with a woman you hate is devastatingly hard. But I could care for him finically on my own. He turned out to be an amazing kid, and I couldn't be prouder. But every single day, I worry if I made the wrong decision. It's been 12 years, and it still makes me feel bad.
That's a tough story. Leaving someone you've raised is never easy, especially when you're concerned about their future. It sounds like you did what you thought was best for both of you. It's good to hear he turned out well despite the challenges. That lingering worry is real, but it seems like you've done your best with the situation. It's normal to question your choices, but it's clear you care deeply.
I was managing a restaurant at the time. One of the servers, who was usually quite peppy, had seemed down in the dumps for a couple days. Finally, I called her in the office and asked her if everything was okay. I told her that if she needed some time off to deal with any personal matters, that it was fine. She just needed to ask. She proceeded to tell me that she had slept with my assistant manager at a party a few weeks back. was pregnant, and planned on terminating the pregnancy. That part is fine with me. What you do in your personal life is your business. She then told me that she was not going to tell him and asked that our conversation be kept confidential, to which I obviously agreed. My assistant manager was a very close friend of mine, and I did not like that weight being on my shoulders. I don't get too friendly with coworkers anymore.
It's tough when work and personal lives collide like that. You try to support your team, but keeping secrets from friends can be heavy. It just complicates things. After that, I think I learned to set some boundaries. It's easier to keep a distance rather than mix those relationships. You want to help, but sometimes it's better to not get too involved.
My wife and I had serious problems conceiving. We had one son, but it took about 5 years to have him. After a few more years of trying for a second kid, we ended up starting the process of adoption from China. Deciding on what route to go for adoption was a big decision on its own. Anyway, shortly after we sent off all the paperwork to China, we found out we were expecting twins. Trying to decide what to do at that point was very difficult for us. Spoiler, we now have 3 rising 5th graders.
That's a big twist in your story. Deciding to adopt or stick with having more kids can be tough. Getting unexpected news like that must have added a lot of pressure. But it sounds like it worked out in the end with 3 kids. Must be quite a handful, but I guess that's just part of the journey.
How to say no to my mother when she was broke and needed money. Before people throw their pitchforks, I'll explain. I left my parents' home at 15 because I wasn't accepted as I'm gay. They were more or less hippies that would rely more on crystals than anything else, despite being devout Christians. That's quite a mix indeed. They blew all their money, as usual, on crystals, magic tarot cards, and other crap. They then came to me asking for money, as I was doing quite well for myself at that point. I had to turn her down as I knew what would happen, just like last time. I offered to instead pay for her utilities and help her get a job, to which she turned me down and called me stuff. I know, the only obvious choice, but she was still my mother. She still is, I suppose, but I want nothing to do with her at this point. Last I heard, my parents were traveling the US in a mobile home, true hippie style. Broke, of course. I don't know if they run scams or whatever to get money, but it wouldn't surprise me.
That's a tough situation. Saying no to family is never easy, especially when they have a history of relying on you. It's clear you tried to help in a more constructive way, but it didn't work out. Those differences in values can really create rifts. It sounds like you've made your peace with it, even if it's not ideal. Sometimes stepping back is the healthiest choice you can make for yourself.
Letting my ex-girlfriend go because she wasn't happy anymore. I didn't want her to feel stuck in the relationship. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make because I still am, crazy for her. I would do anything for her. I wanted her to be my wife and have a family with her. Not a days go by that I don't miss her.
It's tough to let someone go, especially when you care deeply. I had a similar experience once. There was a girl I really liked, but I could see she wasn't happy. I thought it would be best to step back, even though it hurt. I still think about what could have been. It's weird how love can linger like that, even after you decide to part ways.
I had a pit bull puppy follow me home one night. We knew that if we gave him to the Chicago police, they would either shoot him or use him for dogfighting, and we did not have enough space to keep him. So he stayed at home for the night and quickly became my intern at work, great for paper shredding. We couldn't keep him, but my parents took him in, and now he is my dad's best friend. And if anyone robs their house, they'll have 75 pounds of dog about to leap in them.
It's interesting how a random encounter can lead to something great. That pit bull found the right person at the right time. Turning from a lost puppy into a paper shredder intern is kind of funny. It's even better that he ended up in a loving home, protecting the family. Pets can really change the vibe of a household. Sounds like he's got a solid gig now as your dad's buddy. good ending all around.
My girlfriend and I have a mutual friend who is nothing but trouble. We both try to help our friend get back on her feet every time she seems to be going downhill. Lately, things have been getting really bad for her, and nothing we do seems to push her in the right direction. You would think that after going to the hospital after a suicide attempt would open her eyes, but that only lasted for a week. Now, we decided the best thing we can do for her is just show that we are doing our best to live a good life through hard work. Maybe that will convince her she needs to change her ways.
It's tough when a friend is in that kind of situation. You want to help, but sometimes it feels like nothing sticks. You and your girlfriend seem to be handling it well, though. Showing her a good example might make a difference in the long run. At least you're there for her, trying to support her in whatever way you can. Hope she finds her way eventually.
Working as a paramedic at a mass casualty incident, I've had to decide who is worth trying to save and who is going to take too many resources away from other patients, effectively sometimes letting patients die. My mind knows I'm making the right choices based on all my training, but it doesn't make it easier knowing I chose who lived and who died.
That sounds really intense. It's tough to be in a position where you have to make those kinds of calls. Knowing the right choices doesn't always help when you're faced with such heavy consequences. It's a lot of weight to carry, and I can't imagine how that impacts you later on. Just doing your best in a chaotic environment shows how strong you are, even if it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
When I was 23, me and a couple guys had a huge house for ourselves, rented, and through a shitload of good parties, then one night, I got the choice between staying faithful to my then GF or having sex with 4 girls, all 18 and hot, at the same time. I chose the first because I had from an early age had decided to never cheat, and I still stay true to that. I don't regret staying faithful, but I wish I'd called her up, broken up, and had the sex cause that relationship wasn't worth it all.
It's interesting to hear about decisions like that. It sounds like you had a lot going on back then with the parties and choices to make. Sticking to your values is important, but it seems you also have some thoughts on what could have been. It's a balance between what feels right and what you want in the moment. Sometimes those choices shape where we end up.
It wasn't myself, but a guy I met in treatment was from the slums of London, and he and his friend were into some real heavy drugs. He got the opportunity to come to rehab in America, but they didn't have the resources to bring his friends. After a great deal of agonizing contemplation, he decided to go for rehab. So he came to treatment, and about a month in on one of his phone calls, his mother informed him that all of his friends were murdered in a drug raid. His body was physically incapable of handling it. He started having seizures and went into a coma. He woke up a week or so later, and the next few months were torturous for him. But I'm happy to say he's doing much better.
It's a tough story. This guy made a big choice to leave his past behind, but then got hit with that news about his friends. It's wild how quickly life can change. He had to deal with a lot after that, but it's good to hear he's doing better now. That kind of strength is something else.
I saw a horrific accident in front of my apartment. A man got hit by a truck in a hit and run. I ran out not knowing if he was alive or dead. I stayed with him, taking to him about useless things, not knowing if he heard me, but I didn't want to die alone. Fast forward 20 years later, he tracked me down on Facebook and thanked me for staying with him. Said he heard that a woman sat with him, just talking, and disappeared when the EMS showed. Which is true, the professionals came, and I went in an apartment to cry my eyes out.
That's a heavy story. It's wild how moments like that stick with you. Being there for someone in their last moments can haunt or comfort you. It sounds like that guy really appreciated what you did, even if you thought it didn't matter at the time. It's important to be present for others, especially in tough situations. It's a reminder of the impact we can have without even knowing it.
When my kids were little, I was a single parent on food stamps, and my 6-year-old found a diamond solitaire in a parking lot. My choices were sell it and not be late on my rent, or teach my kid a lesson. I chose the latter, and we tracked down the owner. Turns out it was a minister who had just returned from Africa. I would have really gone to hell had I pawned that ring. My kid still remembers it, and remembers how they brought him a gallon of ice cream and a variety of toppings to thank him.
That's a solid story. It's interesting how one small decision can have a big impact. Teaching kids about honesty is important. The fact that the owner was a minister adds a nice touch. It must have felt good for both you and your kid to do the right thing. Plus, the ice cream treat definitely made it memorable. It sounds like a lesson that stuck with them.
A friend of mine held a higher position in my workplace than I did. He wasn't terrible, but management told me if I wanted his position, it was mine. My decision was to either refuse the promotion and keep this person as a friend, or take the position which would improve my overall way of life and lose his friendship. It was difficult for the few days I mulled it over, and eventually worked the courage to speak to him about it. He told me he couldn't stop me from making a decision, and was kind of hurt that they gave me this choice. I ended up not taking it, and instead kept my eye out for better opportunities elsewhere. Within 6 months, I'd had a new job with the better pay I was looking there. This was a few years ago, and we kind of lost touch, but I don't regret my decision.
That's an interesting situation. You had a chance to step up but chose friendship over a promotion. That's not an easy call to make, especially when money is involved. It's good that you found a better job later on. It shows that sometimes taking risks can pay off in different ways. Losing touch with friends happens, but it's nice you still feel good about your choice.
I've got a group of friends. We've been close for years. 2 of them were in a relationship. A third had a girlfriend I didn't much care for. Me and 2 of the friends went on a trip together. Both of their partners didn't come. They cheated. I knew, and I told them to stop, to fess up to what they did, and to break off their relationships that weren't working. They didn't. They kept this shit up for over a year, escalating it to where they would fool around when their partners were in the house. I knew everything, for they both confided in me. I felt terrible for keeping my mouth shut, but I did. I keep everyone's secrets evenly. I did tell them to stop every opportunity one had. In the end, it came out, and the friend had been cheated on by his GF, and one of his best friends called. He asked if I knew. I told him I'd always known. Bless him for not hating me. He thanked me for being a good friend to them, and to this day, we're very close. He did end up needing therapy and suffers from trust issues. Fuck, it was miserable though.
That's a tough situation. It's always hard to balance loyalty to friends with doing what's right. Seeing them go through all that pain must have been rough. You tried your best to advise them, but they made their own choices. It's good to hear your friend appreciated your honesty in the end, even if it hurt. Trust issues can be complicated, and it's great that he has you to lean on. Friendships can really get tested.
Maybe not a moral choice, but not going to see my grandpa when he was on his deathbed after a series of strokes. I had been told by other relatives that he wasn't showing any signs of recognition toward his family, and that he wasn't really there. I felt shitty about it for a while, but I think seeing him like that would have hurt too much. I'm glad that my last memories of him were time I spent with him before the strokes, and he was cognizant and laughing. I think I did the right thing for my mental health, but the deep-seated guilt is still there.
It's tough to navigate those choices. Sometimes, the memories we want to hold on to are more comforting than the reality of a situation. It makes sense to protect your own mental space. Guilt can linger, but it's okay to prioritize your well-being. Remembering the good times can help in processing those feelings. It's a complicated mix of emotions, and handling it the way you did is valid.
I had a breakup with my girlfriend who I loved very much. She did not love me back as much and made this clear twice. Also, I realized I wanted to be in a happier relationship. I wasn't going to keep her around until I met someone better because I knew that was wrong, so I broke up with her. I loved her and would have done anything for her, but there were certain problems we couldn't work out, and I wish we could have.
That sounds tough. Sometimes love isn't enough. It's good you recognize the need to step away before it turned into something worse. Breaking up is hard, especially when feelings are involved. It's better to let go than to stick around and hurt each other more. Hopefully, with time, both of you can move on and find what makes you happier.
A few days ago, I was at a cafe, sitting next to a woman who was talking to her friend about her relatives from Turkey. She mentioned that her sister was coming to visit her and was at the Istanbul airport waiting for her flight. I looked at my phone and saw a CNN notification that there was a terrorist attack at the Istanbul airport. I decided not to say anything. She was going to hear about it soon. So why would I tell her? To give her that many more minutes of fear and terror? I still don't know if this was the right thing to do. What do you guys think?
It's a tough spot to be in. You had to decide between sharing bad news or letting her enjoy those moments without worry. It's understandable to want to spare someone from fear, especially when they might find out soon anyway. Sometimes, keeping things to yourself can feel like the better option, but it's hard to know if it really is. It's all about the timing and the impact on that person.
I had a similar situation with an ex. Nobody died, just the relationship. But he was on a trip back home to see his family and friends for a week or two, and within that time frame, I came to the realization that I needed to break up with him for my own reasons. I waited until he came back for exactly the same reason. I didn't want to ruin his vacation and time with friends. I did pull away a bit and stopped responding to his "I love you." That didn't feel good. And he knew something wasn't right, but I'm sure he didn't expect the end of the relationship. Unfortunately, the day we ended up hanging out together after his trip was Valentine's Day. I couldn't pretend like everything was okay and broke up with him then. About a year and a half after I broke it off, we started to become friends again, and he told me that he wished I had told him while he was with his family a few states away so he could have their emotional support. I thought I was doing the least hurtful thing, but that was a bad situation all around. Uneasy face.
It's tough dealing with breakups, especially when you don't want to ruin someone's good time. I get that. Waiting until he got back must have felt like the right thing at the time. Just shows that there's really no perfect way to handle those situations. Sometimes you think you're being considerate, but in the end, it can make the whole thing messy. It's good you both could reconnect later, though.
I want to hug you too. What a horrible decision to have to make. Sometimes sparing someone pain is the only thing left to do. And 2 years really are only a short time ago. I'm not surprised it all feels very fresh for you. The world, she had her place and hasn't even changed that much. Her friends aren't that much older. Everything else is still in place, but she is missing. That must be so hard to bear. I'm so sorry.
This story hits close to home. I had a friend who passed away a few years back. It felt like the world just kept moving, but I was stuck. Her absence was a constant reminder. We all still gather, but it's never the same without her laugh. It's tough to see everyone else carry on, while you're left with this emptiness. Grief is a weird journey, and it's okay to feel lost sometimes.
Something a lot of people need to realize is that snitching indicates a breach of friendship. In all honesty, a true friend wouldn't put you in a position where you had to make that choice. He knew, just as you did, that showing you a loaded weapon and hinting about causing bodily harm to someone is putting you on the spot. If he was truly your friend, he told you this in the hope that you would do something, which you did. He was looking for help, and you helped.
It's interesting how friendships can get complicated like that. You think you know someone, and then they put you in a tough position. That's not really what friends do. If someone genuinely cares, they wouldn't put you in a situation where you feel pressured to make a choice like that. It can really change how you see them. Sometimes you have to weigh loyalty against safety, and that's tough.
I've had people do things like that for me or my mom. Without it, we'd probably still be living in crushing poverty instead of being solidly middle class. The hoops you have to jump through for some jobs don't tell you a damn thing about what a person could do. Not only did you do the right thing, IMHO, I can't thank you enough for doing it. I'm that woman. My mom's that woman.
It's cool to hear stories like that. People helping each other can really change lives. It's tough navigating those job requirements that don't really show what someone's capable of. It's great your journey led to better opportunities for you and your mom. Those moments of support can make a big difference.
At my place, we used to make warehouse shipping/receiving applicants do typing tests. I don't know why, because all they do is use the numerical keypad, and all the input that requires typing is done by the office. The warehouse is done all in pen, paper, and rubber stamps. When I became in charge of shipping and receiving hires, that stupid typingtest.com ESIPS Fables test was gone for good, since 99% of the label/input are already done in the front office. I cringe to think we lost a lot of good candidates who have strong work ethics but weak typing skills. Now we test new applicants them on practical stuff like figuring out shipping weights and dimensions, /basic plus / X math skills, and inventory counting.
It's interesting how we used to complicate things with typing tests for warehouse roles. I mean, most of the work is just numbers and stamps. When I took over, we got rid of that test and focused on practical skills instead. It's wild to think we might have passed on good workers just because they weren't fast typists. Now, we check for math skills and how they handle actual tasks. Makes more sense.
Did the same with over $1,600. Found it in an unmarked envelope in a parking lot. Turned it into security and made sure I got a receipt and had that guy's name so I could check that it was claimed. A couple hours later, I got a call from a little old lady. The money was her Social Security check she'd cashed and was all the money she had all month. She kept thanking me over and over, and I refused a reward. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was $100 and a voucher for a couple nights in a hotel in Reno. The note said, "Thank you so very much. Now go have some fun." At that time, airfare from our place in San Francisco to Reno was $99 per RT for two. We were newlyweds with _0 spare cash, and that weekend was the first time away we'd had in a long time. We had no money to gamble, but just getting out of town was reward enough.
That's a solid story. Finding that much cash and turning it in shows a lot of character. It's nice how the old lady appreciated it. That spontaneous trip to Reno must have been a good break for you both. Even if you weren't gambling, just getting away can be a nice change of pace. Sometimes, doing the right thing comes back around in unexpected ways. Simple moments like that really stick with you.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love,